Hey there, I have a very special video for you today, and this is a video that I've wanted to make for a very long time. It's about my Broadfork and the person that made my Broadfork, and I've been using this for the past year or so and I absolutely love it, and I've told you guys that, but a lot of you have asked me where I got it from, and I never told you. So today's the day I'm going to share with you not only everything about this fork, but I have the person here that made this. And in the day and age of not knowing, who makes your tools or any of the things that we buy, it feels really good to be connected with someone who actually makes something that you use and are very intimately connected with. The Broadfork is a tool that's very human powered and is something that's very important on my farm and maybe a lot of your farms too. Larry Cooper is a blacksmith, and he's been doing blacksmithing for decades and has been building Broadforks for a long time, and had the opportunity to get to know Larry a little bit, and he's got a really interesting story in just his own life, but also how he got interested in the farming world and making tools and all that kind of stuff. And it's a little bit longer of a video, but you'll hear about Larry's backstory and how he got into it, and also a lot of details about this fork in particular, and some of the details with his manufacturing process, which is very different. And I think it's really cool to hear the story, so I hope that you stick around and watch it. And before we get into that, I do need to take a minute to talk about today's show sponsor, which is Growing for Market magazine. Growing for Market is an incredible resource for growers and farmers all over the place. They have a print version and an online version of their magazine, and all their articles are written by farmers and growers that have a ton of experience, giving you lots of really cool information. They also have an online archive of 1,600 articles for you to check out. I really recommend that you check them out. And there's also a coupon code SHOVEL for 25% off. So links down below, and I want to thank them for making videos like this possible. So let's get on to talking with Larry. Larry, thanks so much for stopping by today. I've really valued our relationship and obviously the tools that you make, but I want people to hear a little bit more about you yourself and sort of your background and how you're all part of this whole farming community, and from a very different part of the farming community as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, it starts with blacksmithing. I entered farming through a distinct side door of blacksmithing. I grew up around, a garden in the yard. My dad always kept something growing. It was just common to see food growing in the yard. And I never tried it really on my own for many years. But I started blacksmithing back in the mid-'80s and went in full-time blacksmithing in 1986. And I had a great time doing that. I did just cool projects for wonderful people. I did architectural and interior design type work. I did beds and gates and fireplaces and lighting and door entries for restaurants and that sort of thing, that type of architectural interior work. And in 2000, made a kind of a cross-country move from Magnolia South to south central Wisconsin. And I discovered just a totally different architectural ironwork scene. It just wasn't like I was used to. And so I started thinking, golly, I've got a lot of years invested in this. I started blacksmithing in '86 and full-time, and in 2000 moved to Wisconsin. And about 2005, I read a very influential book in my life. They're talking about what happens when we run out of cheap gas to guzzle. And they start talking about, food being a major portion of transportation in this country, how salads travel far and wide and that from coast to coast. And I started feeling a little vulnerable at that. And it just occurred to me that, I ought to be growing some food. I'm in this lovely, fertile place. We were living in a house on this big piece of land. It had a garden that once was there. And so in about 2007, borrowed a rototiller because, you're supposed to open up the soil and rototill. You're supposed to turn the soil over, right? So I borrowed one from a guy and it broke on me very terribly. I pulled the clutch and I got the end of a row. I was using it, worked fine for a while. Got the end of a row, pulled the clutch in, and the cable broke. It's like, ooh, this is dreadful. I've got a a 10 horsepower thing headed straight for my fence, and I can't make it stop now. So I said, I'll just use the kill switch. Well, the kill switch didn't work. I didn't know it didn't work. I had just turned it on. I didn't think about making it stop. So it kept going. It started, chicken wire was coming in from both sides, rolling itself up in the tines of the rototiller. I finally just reached down and grabbed the spark plug wire and tasered myself, basically getting the damn thing to shut off. But it shut off, and there was my fence kind of wound into the tines of the rototiller. And I just said, there must have been something before gas engines that we used to do this. And I had no idea what that was.
Okay, so that was kind of the end of the rototiller for you. So
yeah, I said, why do we want these things? What is it about this tool that makes us want these things? It's stinky, it's heavy, you got to have a truck to move it around. This is just like, it's just a little garden. Yes. I don't need this.
So you start looking into other tools or other ways to farm?
Well, that's when I went to my Wayback Machine, and back before the internet there was a thing, and it was called the Whole Earth Catalog, and I have a copy of it. I'll get it, and there it is. That is the internet in print in 1981, and it was in my closet. You can see it's old, and it has everything you need to know about the world. Here it is. So right here on page 131, I opened up, and there it was. This was the first Broadfork I ever laid my eyes on, right here. And they called it a U-bar digger. And so for my book I bought in 1981, to that day, I had never seen that illustration. So I looked up U-bar digger on the modern internet and found Broadforks. And I said, wow. The picture in the dictionary of a Broadfork is two handles, a foot bar, and say some number of tines. And I said, gosh, I'm an advanced blacksmith. I can do this. I thought, I've got work to do in my shop. I'll just do that and hire some other blacksmith to make one for me. So I shopped, and I looked at the two places that sold Broadforks at that point, and they were both out of stock. I said, well, I guess I have to make one now. And so I started working with materials. My anvil was about 50 feet from my garden gate, So I just started putting things together. I found a pair of handles at a hardware store. Nothing special. They were post-hole digger handles. And I got some pipe, and I made the handles fit the pipe, and I welded a foot bar up, and I started working with tines, and I found a tine that really worked. And then I started visiting forums, gardening forums on the internet, and I said to people, you have a Broadfork, what do you like about it, and what do you not like about it? And somebody said, well, I broke mine, I can't fix it. I said, something needs to be repaired. And somebody said, oh, mine, is this, or mine is that, or I have one of those with the metal handles, and when it's used in the summer, you can't touch them, and in the winter, your hands freeze. And I thought, it's got to be wood. And I decided, I don't want to make all the Broadforks in the world. I just want to make the best one. So I studied, and I created, and I worked, and I tried different options until I found the one that I do now. And I've been making these since 2008, and just a very small scale. I've made about 2,500 of them now, and three different models. But it all started with just that idea, that dang rototiller that broke down on me.
I love it, and I'm always fascinated by the profession of blacksmithing and the fact that you're just like, hey, I need to make something for this purpose, and you make it. Like, that's amazing to me.
Yeah.
And you got me one of your Broadforks last year. I've been using it, and it's so well thought out, and I can't express that enough, like every little detail about it. And I know you've been working on this design for a long time, but talk a little bit before we get into the design and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about your manufacturing process and what makes that a little bit different?
Yeah, and and I started looking at it from a lot of different levels. I read this article basically that said, what are we going to do when we run out of cheap gas to guzzle? And it made me realize that, and I'm from the 70s, 80s, 70s, I would graduate high school in the mid-70s, and that era of the first Earth Day, which today happens to be Earth Day. And but that first Earth Day, I remember people talking about that. It didn't quite register with me, but I hung out with environmentalist types, and I mean, I've got friends that have been doing that stuff, the total environmentalist thing, their whole lives, and I just had never really gone deep there. I'm careful with things, and I'm not wasteful with resources and so forth. But I started looking at, this is a business, and blacksmithing is one of those businesses. Nobody wants a blacksmith in the neighborhood. It's dirty and noisy and smoke and all that. Well, I got out of coal. I haven't used coal in decades now. I quit using coal. I go with propane heat for my forge. But it's like you can clean other things up. So I decided to try to find ways in the manufacturing process. And I knew steel comes in certain sizes. So, the tines were going to be X diameter and X length. And I said, but it can be a little less X length if I can get more out of a bar with less waste. So I started designing just based on that. But the idea was, when I first made a Broadfork, I said, I want to make 10. And I asked my wife, what would it cost to make a website? And she says, make a website for $100. I said, let's do it. So I bought a 10-word ad in Countryside magazine for $30 for 2 months, and did that for a couple of years. And that's the only advertising I've ever done. And so I got my 10 made, and the magazines hit the mailboxes. And the first day the magazines hit the mailboxes, I sold the first one. I said, great, because I was afraid, these are all going to be Christmas gifts. But in those first 10, I started thinking about the use of the materials and how to minimize the waste. And that's the whole game to me, was to minimize my waste stream, to use non-toxic things when in finishing and in production. So, for example, I don't paint these. How crazy is to buy something that's freshly painted and you stick it in your beautiful organic soil and the paint rubs off in your soil? That's crazy. So I use water to clean mine. I use a pressure washer to clean my forks, and I hand finish everything with linseed oil and beeswax, or a linseed oil and turpentine type finish. To just seal it until you get it, and you can do it afterwards, or just use it and it won't rust. There's one place I grind anything. It's just a little thing to saddle up the foot bar to the it's just a very minimal process.
Right. And I think people don't realize also, like, in a lot of those tools, like, there's things in the grit that you were telling me about this.
Yeah, it's like aluminum oxide, which is a terrible thing to breathe. And it's not only that, but there's a binder that holds that stuff. It's like an epoxy that holds it to the sanding in conglomerate and on the sanding belt or whatever. And that stuff gets hot when it grinds away. And that's in your air. That off gases. And it's either in your lungs or in your shop or in the neighborhood, wherever you are. So, but I minimize all of that. I just decided I didn't want to go and make a bunch of these for the rest of my life. This is something I figured I can do this when I'm an old guy, and so I'll just continue. But I didn't want to get into that. I didn't want to fall into that trap of having a paint booth and having barrels of solvent sitting around. It's like, nah.
Yeah,
linseed oil and turpentine.
Yeah, and I think that one of the beautiful things, not only about your product, but it's how it's manufactured, the care, the environmental impact, all of that comes into play and makes the product really special.
Yeah, I thought about it from day one, and that's why I've just stuck to it. I've been faithful to that concept with everything. I just don't want to waste anything, and there's enough of that. But everything I cut off, I take it back to the scrap yard. I wanted something that would be repeatable. The design would be repeatable. It would be predictable from the cost of availability of materials and minimize all the waste involved in the stream. And so my choices and handles were, I can go with a square handle like this one here, and the square handle is half square, half round. the upper side of the handle part is what you hold is the round. The square would go down into a square tube handle. But I looked at that and I thought, wait a minute, there's one trick that blacksmiths know, and people who use axes like for a living, they know. The grain structure in the wood is crucial to the strength of the tool handle. And with a striking tool, particularly like a blacksmith's hammer, use this thing all day, every day for years. You want the handle to be as strong as possible. And you can only achieve that if you construct the handle with the grain structure running in line with your strike. So like with this handle here, you can see the lines vertically in there. That's the way I want to strike that tool. If it's this way, the grain in the wood works here like a deck of cards. It's flexible. It's too flexible. It's a lot stronger that way. It essentially gives it that I-beam structure in the wood grain. And in a square wood handle, you just can't achieve that. This may be cut exactly diagonally, and this one is. So you don't know what you're getting. And I decided to go one step further. And I take mine and actually I go to the trouble of matching the grain. So the grain structure of each handle is the same. These may have been on the same piece of wood at one point in their lives. But I pair them and I number them. So each one goes with a fork. And the width of this grain structure will be wider than this or narrower than this. This is pretty much in the middle. But if I put one with a narrower structure and a wider structure, one's a little bit softer. It's not as stiff as the other. I'd like to pair these. I also buy select grade ash. These are white ash handles, and they're from the Tennessee River Valley. I've got a handle company that's a fourth generation handle company I buy from. They've been in business since the 1880s. And the machine actually that cuts these handles is from 1903. They've actually burned down the sawmill twice, but rebuilt that machine. They had to put all new electrics in it, all new springs in it after the fire. But these handles are made from a really old machine. And I also wanted to have a handle that I could specifically fit a piece of tubing to. And this is what's called DOM tubing. It's highly precise dimensionally. It's round and it doesn't have a seam in it. And that allows this to just slide in so effortlessly. You don't have to whittle it, you don't have to do anything. The bolt hole right here lines up, and I use a 3/8 inch stainless steel lag screw to hold it all together, which allows you to take that screw out, take the handles out, and maintain the handles. The handles that aren't maintained end up being you just got to get rid of them. You can't fix bad handles once you've let handles go too long a time. They're just bad.
So the handles are a great example here of really the care that you take in every part of this.
Yeah.
Right. Just getting the two handles to feel the same when you pull them.
Right. Right.
What about the business end down there?
Yeah. And the whole Broadfork thing. It's like I can never be the best violin maker in the world. I can never be the best blacksmith in the world. But I thought, I'll aim low. I can be the best Broadfork maker in the world.
Make a good Broadfork, Larry. I love mine.
Sure. And this is yours. So the business end of the Broadfork, we have the bolt-on handle here. These are stainless steel. And like I said, you can take these screws out, pull the handles out, and you can pull the handle out to maintain it. Everything is welded up together here. It's like I wanted the body of the thing to be like a part off a tugboat, and it would just last eternally.
So you looked at a lot of designs that you didn't like, points of failure, things like that. So how about with your design here? What makes it different?
Well, it's as sturdy as it can possibly be. Like I said, it's like a part off a tugboat. This is heavy wall material. This is structural tubing. NASCAR basically uses this kind of tubing to make safety cages in the race cars. The tines. This particular tine, this is a Bertha fork, the second model I made. I did the standard. The difference between the standard, the original fork, and this one is this gusset. And this gusset, if you look at this from a physics perspective, the Broadfork is two levers the handle's making one, the tine's being another. And where that's stuck in the soil, that becomes the fulcrum. So all the stress from this 4 feet of handles times 2 times your body weight pulling on it goes right there. And this gives that a great bridge of strength. It gussets that out, and it just makes that really, really strong. So you don't want to abuse these things, but this will take a lot of heavy use.
Yeah.
That's what that adds.
Yeah, I felt that immediately the first time I put it in the ground. It felt like, it's opposed to the Broadfork I had where the tines are bending all over the place. Like, these aren't going anywhere.
Yeah, I've had great luck with these. And it's one of those things that if you do, I think just in tool usage in general, Josh, folks don't realize that back when these tools were first coming around, this thing is hundreds of years old. This was not invented this year by an American. This comes from way old Europe. But the concept of your body is the only source of power you have. You don't have a horse. You're a peasant. You're a poor person. You can't afford livestock. You have your body to do all the work that has to be done. Everything that was done then was done by humans. We didn't have processing factories and machinery things. It's like we did it ourselves. And you had to be efficient with what you did. And that's the Broadfork was at that zenith of human understanding of biomechanics, which didn't even exist at the time, of course, by that known name. But tools had to be efficient, and I wanted that. I wanted to create that in this tool. And a Broadfork is not a tool you should jump up and down on and jackhammer into the ground and grunt yourself and grit your teeth and jam on the handle. It should feel less like a tool and more like a dance partner. It should be a rhythmic, light movement that you do with it.
Agreed. I've really enjoyed it, and I think I've said this before, but it's a tool that I find that it sparks joy when I pick it up.
Yeah.
Like when I go to grab the Broadfork, not only do I feel happy about it, but also I feel connected to you, Larry, because you made the Broadfork for me, and that is super, super special. So you are selling these through your website?
Right.
All right. And
right.
So we will leave links down below for all that stuff for people to check out.
Yeah.
And people have been asking me nonstop about where I got it from, and so I'm really happy to share not only the Broadfork, where it's coming from, but the person behind it.
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's like I say, it's a passion for me, and it's changing out of blacksmithing where I did beautiful work, stately work that's going to be hanging somewhere for hundreds of years, and and in collections or whatever. It has been so rewarding to work with young farmers. This has just been incredible. It's like it's lifted me to see the people who are starting with tools again, working soil again, the young folks getting into this. And I just want to be a part of what supports that. And this has just been incredible for me to step into this whole world and find these new growers. And folks they're really interested in doing things the right way, and with minimal tillage and opening up the soil. That's the whole point behind the Broadfork is this goes down into the soil, and it creates channels. This large diameter, this 5/8 diameter steel, and it creates a channel for water to go down, for nutrient to go down, for air to go down, and lifts that soil and breaks through a hard pan and just recreates the soil. It gets down into the worm zone they're plenty long enough. These are about 9 inches, 9 1/4 inches deep. I make a longer one, the big Bertha, but honestly, this will be the ultimate workhorse. I think the Bertha which is named after my mother's mother, who was named Bertha, and tough lady. She was a sharecropper's daughter, born in 1895, and she saw a lot of stuff. And they managed, but it was a hard scrabble life for her and my mom as well. But I learned a lot from that generation. I used to spend summers up with my great aunts and grandmother up in North Alabama back in my youth, and got to know the tremendous strength in that generation and those people. But this one is named after my grandmother.
Beautiful story. Larry, we as farmers really appreciate the work that people like yourself are doing and making our jobs better so we can grow better food. So
Yeah.
I appreciate taking the time to come by today and tell your story, and hopefully people are interested in picking up a Broadfork from you. I hope they go and check it out.
Sure.
All right, thanks, Larry.
You bet.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, learning about Larry and the Broadfork that he makes and some of his backstory, and he's just an incredible person. And if you are interested in picking up one of these Broadforks, of course, links down below, and they're all made by Larry himself, and I can't recommend it enough, not only because it's an amazing Broadfork, but also, you know, you get to know the person that made it, and every time I pick it up, I'm not only happy to pick it up because it's a very quality tool and it performs really well in the job that it needs to do in the beds, but also because you know, the connection that I have with the person who made me the tool. So again, links down below, and I also really want to thank Growing for Market for sponsoring this video. So go check them out too. Again, links down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit subscribe if you're not already, and we'll see you in the next one.